Um, so imagine you're just standing in a quiet forest,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm picturing it.
and you're watching these two little butterflies just fighting over a tiny patch of sunlight on the ground.
Hmm.
Now, I want you to imagine you're sitting in this massive, government building, watching politicians draft a really complex new tax law.
Right. Quite the change of scenery there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But what if I told you that both of those scenarios, like the forest floor and the Senate floor, are actually driven by the exact same underlying mechanism?
Wow. That's
And what if I told you that the modern democratic state, the one you live in right now, basically operates on the exact same structural logic as, like, an organized crime syndicate?
I mean, it sounds like an exaggeration, right? Maybe even a bit of a provocation.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you actually, peel back the layers of human civilization, the architecture holding everything up is just, it's startlingly raw.
It really is. And to you, listening to us right now, if you are someone who is just intensely curious about how the world actually functions, who wants to gain profound knowledge quickly and thoroughly without feeling drowned in all that dense academic jargon, well, this deep dive is built specifically for you.
Exactly. Today, we are exploring Elias Kunis's essay, Full Stack Survival.
Mm.
And our mission here is to fundamentally change how you view the invisible architecture of our civilization. We're going to decode the real reasons why, laws, governments, and even human cooperation exist in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can look at these massive civilizational structures, courts and constitutions and all that, we have to start at the absolute base layer of human
Or
behavior.
the absolute foundation.
Yeah, the concept of mine versus yours. And the essay brings up this absolutely fascinating reality in evolutionary biology. So let's go back to those butterflies I mentioned.
Oh, yeah, the speckled wood butterfly?
Yes, the speckled wood butterfly.
Oh.
So the males fiercely compete for these little sunlit patches on the forest floor because securing one is literally the only way they can find a mate.
But there is this absolute ironclad rule in their behavior that researchers discovered.
Right.
The resident of a sunlit patch always wins a dispute.
Wait, always?
Always. If an intruder flies into that patch, even if the intruder is like physically larger or younger or stronger, the intruder just retreats.
That is so wild.
Yeah, and it happens even if the resident has only occupied that patch of sunlight for a few seconds.
See, that totally reminds me of that unwritten rule of, like, saving a seat at a crowded movie theater.
Oh, exactly.
Like, if you walk in and you see a jacket draped over a chair, you just accept it's taken.
You don't even question it.
Right. Like, I could easily just toss the jacket aside and sit down. I'm probably stronger than the jacket's owner, right?
One would hope.
But I don't. So is this just some random animal instinct, or is there, like, a hard mathematical logic to why we respect ownership like this?
What's fascinating here is that it's deeply mathematical. The mechanism is purely game theoretic.
Okay, game theoretic.
The
Meaning,
biologists actually call it the bourgeois strategy.
right.
Essentially, fighting over every single patch of sunlight or, every single theater seat is just incredibly expensive.
Because you're just exhausted all the time.
Exactly. It burns a massive amount of energy, and it carries a really high risk of injury. So organisms across nature converge on this convention because the physical cost of endless, escalated fighting is just far worse than the benefit of winning any single patch of dirt.
So respecting ownership is basically just a way to economize violence. We stop fighting just because fighting is exhausting.
Precisely. And human property rights, they operate on the exact same mechanism, just at a higher level of abstraction.
Okay, how so?
Well, we see this in something economists call the endowment effect. People reliably value what they already possess far more than identical goods they don't own.
Oh, sure. Like, if I buy a coffee mug for $5, I wouldn't sell it to you for less than 10.
Right. Our brains literally treat our owned resources as extensions of our physical selves that require defense.
So property rights are just formalized territory defense. Like,
Yeah.
we've outsourced the physical fighting to the law, so we don't have to literally throw punches every time we go to the grocery store.
That is a great way to put it. Property rights emerge specifically when the cost of defining and enforcing rules just becomes cheaper than the cost of continuous conflict.
Right, right.
Think about the classic tragedy of the commons. The idea that if a grazing pasture is open to everyone with no rules, people will just selfishly overconsume until the pasture is destroyed.
And usually fighting each other in the process, yeah.
Exactly. So we replace that exhausting, low-level warfare with a formal structure backed by the community. The money a society spends on security, police, legal systems, It isn't just administrative overhead.
It's the cost of not fighting.
Yes. It is the foundational operating expense of a society that chooses property over constant physical brawling.
But it doesn't always have to be about private property and physical fences, right?
No, not at all.
Because I've read about indigenous communities or these small fishing villages that manage shared resources perfectly well without strictly fencing them off or calling the police.
Oh, they absolutely can, but they do it through intense peer monitoring and social sanctioning.
Right. Everyone is watching you, basically.
Yeah, it's an alternative governance technology. Instead of building physical fences, they use social capital to enforce the rules. So it's still a form of cooperative warfare against resource depletion. It just uses social pressure instead of barbed wire.
Okay, so if property is just a formalized way to stop fighting over territory, someone still needs to enforce those formal rules, right?
Exactly.
And that brings us to the state itself. Because Kunis highlights this incredibly bold historical claim in the essay that the historical formation of nation-states is practically indistinguishable from organized crime.
It really challenges our entire civic education, doesn't it?
It really does.
We like to think governments formed through, peaceful town hall meetings and social contracts.
All right, everyone holding hands and voting.
But if you look at how states actually formed historically, it was through coercion wielded by power-seeking elites who just systematically eliminated their rivals.
So if I try to view the state through the lens of, a mafia boss, the job description actually seems pretty clear.
Break it down.
Well, first, the mob has to wipe out rival gangs in other neighborhoods to expand their turf. So that's war making.
Correct. Eliminating external rivals is step one.
Then, the mob boss has to take out any up-and-comers within their own crew to make sure they're the only ones allowed to use force.
State making.
Right, state making. You secure a total monopoly on violence.
Yes. And the third function is protection.
Which means?
Neutralizing threats to the state's clients, citizens, while simultaneously making it very, very clear that the state itself is the biggest threat to anyone who doesn't pay for that protection.
Oh, wow. Which leads right into the fourth function.
Yeah.
Extraction. The shakedown, taxes, just taking people's money and labor to fund the other three operations.
That systematic resource acquisition is key. The entire bureaucratic apparatus of the modern state. The courts, the treasuries, the administrative agencies, they were all originally engineered to optimize resource extraction for waging war.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Kings moved to predictable, rule-based taxation simply because it was more efficient and generated way less resistance than just, sending thugs to unpredictably pillage villages.
Okay, well, that reframes history completely, but how does that connect to our lives right now? Because most of us living in open democracies, we don't exactly feel like we're being actively extorted by warlords.
Well, the primary function of any social order is containing violence. Historically, elites just distributed privileges and monopolies to pacify anyone capable of fighting.
Like giving land to the knights so they don't rebel.
Right. But in modern democracies, what economists call open access orders, competition is entirely formalized. We use impersonal property rights, the rule of law, and free markets to manage conflict.
So instead of fighting with swords, we fight with lawsuits and patent claims and market competition. It's exactly.
We've taken this raw, bloody conflict and turned it into bureaucratic maneuvering.
And in a modern democracy, every law and regulatory framework is essentially a micro-treaty.
A micro-treaty, I like that.
They are designed to preempt what we call kinetic violence. Actual, physical, flesh and blood fighting in the streets by providing a formal dispute resolution process. But the underlying reality remains. If it ever becomes socially acceptable for factions to seize property or power through extra-legal force without facing consequences, the formalization fails.
And we just go right back to the mob boss era.
The system reverts immediately back to raw kinetic violence, yeah.
Oh, okay. But, this paints a pretty grim picture of humanity, doesn't it?
It's definitely stark.
If human society is entirely built on a foundation of managed violence and resource extraction, it brings up this massive paradox.
Right.
Why are humans so incredibly cooperative? Why do we help strangers? Why do we contribute to public goods or punish bad actors even when it costs us personally, with no immediate reward? It is the most obvious objection to the idea that everything boils down to warfare and extraction.
Yeah. I try to picture it like playing a massive multiplayer video game.
Okay, yeah.
You've got all these rival players running around, competing for loot, occasionally fighting each other, but then suddenly this impossibly hard boss level drops into the map.
Right.
And all those rival players immediately stop shooting each other and form an alliance. Because if they don't work together to defeat the boss, they all lose. Is that basically what's happening with human cooperation?
That is a brilliant analogy. Researchers have actually used evolutionary models to resolve this paradox, and they point to a concept called parochial altruism.
Parochial altruism. Um, Break that down for me. What does that actually mean?
It means that human altruism and cooperation actually evolved directly alongside hostility toward outgroup members.
Wait, really?
Yeah. During our early evolutionary history, human groups that possessed high internal cooperation, deep tribal solidarity, and a willingness to self-sacrifice, they consistently outcompeted, subjugated, or simply exterminated rival groups that didn't have those traits.
That is intense. So our kindness, our empathy, our ability to trust our neighbors, it's actually a weapon.
A highly cooperative, high-trust society is a highly optimized machine for competing against external threats.
Wow.
Lethal intergroup warfare was actually the primary evolutionary driver for our cooperative, pro-social behaviors. Our institutions ensure behavioral uniformity so that an entire society can act as a cohesive, competitive unit.
But the enemy isn't always like another tribe of humans with spears, right?
No, absolutely not.
Because the essay mentions that sometimes the adversary isn't even intelligent. Sometimes the adversary is just nature itself, like entropy, starvation, harsh winters, or natural disasters.
Absolutely. Species that developed mutual support mechanisms simply outsurvive those that engaged in constant internal competition.
That makes total sense.
Working together to build a shelter or share food during a famine is a way of fighting back against thermodynamic decay.
So the big takeaway here is that cooperation, advanced warfare technology,
Yes.
families, alliances, mutual aid networks, charities, these aren't just nice things we do because we're inherently peaceful. These are defensive fortifications.
That's the perfect way to look at it.
We build them to survive threats that are just too large for any individual to face alone.
They are survival mechanisms operating at different scales, yes.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because zooming out from individual cooperation, how does a whole society organize these massive defenses?
Right. How does it scale?
Yeah. And the essay introduces this incredibly compelling model. It describes civilization not as a static object, but as a multi-layer survival stack, like a hierarchy of dependencies.
And we can build that stack from the ground up right now.
Let's do it.
At the absolute base, you have the physical layer. This is your military defense, your energy grids, your supply chains. If you don't have physical security, nothing else matters.
Right.
But if that is secure, you step up to the biological and demographic layer. Is the population healthy? Are birth rates sustaining the society, or is it aging out of existence?
Right. Because a strong military doesn't matter if you literally have no citizens to run it.
Exactly.
And above the demographic layer comes the economic layer, I assume.
Yes. How does the society handle trade, fiscal sustainability, and resource allocation?
Got it.
And once you have a physical presence, a population, and an economy, you move into the less visible, abstract layers. Above the economy sits the institutional layer.
So that's the governance mechanisms, the courts, the rule of law.
Exactly, which in turn relies on the informational layer, how a society produces knowledge, conducts science, and tracks what is actually true.
Okay, and that supports the cultural layer, right?
You got it. This is the shared meaning, the trust, the social cohesion that keeps everyone pulling in the same direction.
And sitting at the very top.
Sitting at the very top is the memetic layer, how ideas are selected and how core values are transmitted across generations.
It just completely mirrors an IT network protocol stack.
Oh, it really does?
Like if you are trying to send a file over the internet, you rely on the physical layer of the fiber optic cables, moving up to the transport layer of your Wi-Fi, all the way up to the application layer of the web browser you're clicking on.
Right.
And the golden rule of an IT stack is that if your Wi-Fi is down at the transport layer, it absolutely does not matter how secure your web browser is at the application layer. The whole system fails.
And that is the terrifying reality of the civilizational stack. Failure at ANY single layer cascades through the whole system. The layers are inextricably coupled.
So you can't just ignore one.
No, a civilization might have an impenetrable military defense at the physical layer and a booming economy. But if it undergoes demographic collapse, it still dies. It just takes a little longer.
Or if the economic layer is robust, but the institutional feedback mechanisms are broken, the society will misallocate its resources until it just can't defend itself anymore.
Imagine a civilization with functioning courts and a strong military, but a completely collapsed information layer.
Oh, wow.
It will optimize its systems confidently and enthusiastically in the completely wrong direction because it just doesn't know what is true anymore.
That feels very relevant right now.
Strength at 6 layers does not compensate for a fatal gap at the 7th. Monitoring and defense have to operate at every single layer simultaneously.
Which brings us to the most urgent part of this whole deep dive. If the survival stack is so vulnerable to a cascading failure, how well are our modern states actually monitoring it?
That's the big question.
Because when you look at the real world, the blind spots are staggering. I mean, we spend trillions globally monitoring the physical layer, militaries, intelligence agencies, border security.
Absolutely.
We also monitor the economic layer
Yeah.
obsessively, central banks tracking inflation, agencies measuring GDP. But then we almost entirely ignore the institutional, informational, and cultural layers.
It is a massive vulnerability. The essay points out that no modern democracy systematically tests whether its legislation actually works as designed across different ministries.
Wait, really? Nobody's checking?
We have fragmented oversight. Like, one office might look at the immediate fiscal cost of a new bill, while another models tax interactions. But nobody is testing the compound, long-term effects of laws to see if they are systematically depleting our crucial capital stocks.
I want to pause right there. Capital stocks. Let's make sure we are super clear on what that means in this context, because we aren't just talking about money in a bank vault, right?
Right. A capital stock in this civilizational framing is any essential reservoir of resources that keeps the stack from collapsing.
Okay.
That includes financial reserves, yes. But it also includes the stock of social trust, the stock of population health, the stock of shared cultural meaning.
I see.
If a new policy subtly destroys social cohesion over a decade, it is depleting a vital capital stock, even if the GDP goes up.
Okay, so I have to push back here.
Go ahead.
If monitoring all 7 layers and protecting all these invisible capital stocks is so critical to survival, why don't we just monitor everything all the time? Like, let's get the government to actively measure our culture and tightly control our information flow to keep us safe.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that instinct leads directly into what Kunis calls the control trap.
The control trap.
Look at China's approach. They actually have full stack monitoring. They quantify military, economic, demographic, scientific, and cultural dimensions as one unified metric of national power.
But they use it for authoritarian control. It's a massive surveillance state.
Because they optimize for the survival of the ruling party, not the health of the civilization itself. They use the data to suppress information rather than adapt to it.
Right. That makes sense.
This is why political scientists warn against extending a security threat label to non-military domains like culture or demographics. Calling something a security threat is a very powerful action.
Yeah, you don't throw that term around lightly.
It inevitably justifies emergency powers, bypassing normal laws, and concentrating authority in the executive branch.
Ah, I see. Like, we have a cultural security crisis, so we must suspend civil liberties to protect the stack, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The failure isn't that they monitor the whole stack, it's that they monitor in order to aggressively control. The scope of the monitoring isn't the problem, the architecture of the feedback loop is.
Okay, so we are walking a tightrope here.
Yeah.
We urgently need to monitor our civilizational vulnerabilities across all 7 layers without sliding into an authoritarian control state.
Yes.
How do we actually do that?
The essay proposes a specific solution, a mechanism audit.
Okay.
It is a way to systematically test whether laws produce their stated outcomes without giving the government unchecked power.
So let's play this out with, like, a real-world hypothetical.
Sure.
Let's say a government passes a massive new housing regulation, and they promise it will make homes affordable and improve community health. How does a mechanism audit test that without becoming authoritarian?
It relies on 3 vital properties. First, radical transparency.
Meaning?
The audit of this housing regulation wouldn't be done in some secret committee. Every finding, all the data on whether homelessness went down or up, is public and challengeable by independent researchers. The instrument creates visibility, not authority.
Okay, that makes sense. You can't hide the results.
Right.
And what's the second property? The essay mentions taking an engineering approach.
Yes, mechanism focus. The audit ignores left versus right political tribalism. It simply asks, did this legislative formula work as intended?
So no politics.
Exactly. It doesn't debate the morality of the housing law, it just calculates the math. Did it deplete the capital stock of economic mobility? Did it improve the capital stock of population health?
Yeah.
Most apparent value disagreements in politics are actually just uncomputed empirical
Oh,
disagreements.
I like that. Like, we're not actually arguing about whether a bridge should exist. We're arguing about the tensile strength of the concrete. We just don't realize it.
That's a great way to put it. And the third property is the most crucial safeguard against tyranny. No emergency powers.
Oh, wow.
The audit produces findings, not orders.
So if the audit proves the housing law is a total disaster, like it's destroying community trust and bankrupting the city, the auditors can't just repeal the law themselves.
Correct. If the audit shows an institutional mechanism is objectively threatening a vital capital stock, it automatically triggers parliamentary debate.
Ah.
The output is information, not force. The elected representatives still have to debate and decide what to do. It's no different than an independent economic bureau reporting that GDP is down, but applied to the entire institutional layer of society.
I see the logic. I really do.
Yeah.
But I have to raise a philosophical objection here.
Let's hear it.
Doesn't reducing everything to survival mechanisms and capital stocks and warfare
Yeah.
sort of strip the beauty out of human life? Like, is a beautiful symphony or a historic university really just a defensive weapon against entropy? Doesn't viewing everything as a survival tool sort of ruin the point of being a civilization in the first place?
This raises an important question, and the essay acknowledges that this critique carries weight. But the key resolution is understanding that the warfare framing is a lens, not an ontology.
Let's define ontology really quickly for the listeners.
Right. Ontology is the study of the fundamental nature of what something is. The essay isn't claiming that a symphony is only a survival tool at its core. It just reveals the defensive architecture of society.
Okay.
It doesn't claim to exhaust what those institutions mean to the people experiencing them.
So a university can be a vital knowledge production mechanism for the survival stack and a sacred place of human meaning simultaneously.
Yes. The mechanism audit just measures effects. It looks at a vital resource and asks, is it growing, is it stable, or is it declining? The philosophy of what a university truly is remains entirely up to you. But if we don't map our civilizational threat surface, and if we don't test our laws, those untracked layers will quietly degrade. And eventually, the cascade reaches the physical and economic layers that everybody watches, at which point the whole stack collapses, taking the beautiful symphonies and the universities down with it.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed all the way from the territorial disputes of butterflies on the forest floor to the dizzying heights of civilizational collapse.
We really have.
We've seen that property rights are fundamentally a way to save the massive cost of endless physical fighting. We've seen that the state is an engine of organized extraction that we tolerate to keep the peace. And we've learned that our incredible human capacity for cooperation is actually the most advanced survival technology we have.
And most importantly, we see the urgent need to audit the invisible mechanisms of our society before an unseen failure brings the entire 7-layer stack crashing down. This hidden architecture isn't just academic theory, it is operating in your life right now.
And that is what we want you to reflect on today.
Think about your own daily life. What stands out to you about how your own community cooperates and defends itself? Where do you see these layers of the survival stack operating in your neighborhood, your workplace, or your local government?
It totally changes how you look at the world. We started this deep dive talking about the raw mechanisms of survival, how the unwritten rules of society are secretly engineered to prevent violence and chaos. So I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own. If everyday cooperation, trust, and our social norms are actually advanced warfare technologies evolved to fight entropy in rival groups, what invisible battle is being fought and won every single time you do something as simple as holding the door for a stranger or deciding to trust a new coworker?
It is a really powerful shift in perspective.
The unseen architecture is everywhere once you know how to look for it. Until next time, keep exploring the deep dive.